The guards stared at each other in disbelief. In 20 years of working on death row, none of them had heard a request like that. Jackson Reed, and a former soldier turned prisoner, sat quietly in his cell, hands folded, eyes distant. He wasn't asking for a fancy meal. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He just said softly, "Before I go, I just want to see Duke, my dog, one last time." The silence that followed was heavy. Even the buzzing fluorescent light above seemed to hum a little quieter. The guards exchanged uncertain glances, unsure if they'd heard him right. Duke wasn't just any dog. He was a German shepherd trained to serve beside Jackson during his years in the army. Together, they'd been through the worst: gunfire, explosions, and nights when the air smelled like fear and dust. Duke had been more than a companion. He had been Jackson's anchor, his brother in arms. But when Jackson came back home, things weren't the same. The war ended, but the battles in his mind never did. His wife couldn't handle the nightmares, the outbursts, the man who flinched at fireworks and slept with the lights on. She left. The bills piled up, and soon after, the bottle became his only comfort. Then came that one terrible night, a bar fight, a gun, and one tragic mistake. A life lost. Jackson was sentenced to death, and Duke was taken in by a local veterans shelter. Now, years later, all Jackson had left was the memory of that loyal dog who used to rest his head on his lap during long patrols, eyes always watching, waiting for his command. When the warden heard the request, he sighed deeply. "This isn't standard procedure," he said, rubbing his temples. "Animals aren't allowed in the facility." But something about Jackson's eyes made him pause. They weren't cold or bitter. They were just tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying too much pain for too long. After a long silence, the warden finally said, "I'll see what I can do." For the next few days, the prison buzzed with quiet whispers. Some guards thought it was a waste of time. Others secretly hoped it would be approved. And then one morning, the warden walked into Jackson's cell with a faint smile. "Your request. It's been granted. Duke will be here tomorrow." For the first time in years, Jackson's lips trembled into a faint smile. "Thank you," he whispered. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay on the thin mattress staring at the ceiling, replaying memories of muddy boots, desert winds, and Duke's steady bark echoing through the chaos. He wasn't thinking about the needle or the clock ticking down his final hours. He was thinking about his best friend, the only soul who'd never judged him, never left his side.
And as the first light of dawn crept through the cell window, Jackson closed his eyes and whispered, "One more day, Duke, just one more." The news spread quickly across the prison. The man on death row wanted to see his dog before he died. Some inmates laughed, calling it sentimental nonsense. Others were just confused. But one young officer, Ben, couldn't stop thinking about it. Unlike the older guards, hardened by years of routine, Ben was still new, still the kind of man who believed there was good left in people, even behind steel bars. He'd seen Jackson Reed many times, quiet, polite, never caused trouble. The kind of inmate who said please and thank you even when shackled. Something about the request didn't feel like a stunt or a trick. It felt real. So that night, when his shift ended, Ben went down to the records room and started reading Jackson's old case file. The more he read, the more his chest tightened. Jackson wasn't a cold-blooded killer like everyone thought. He had once been a decorated soldier, a man who risked his life for others. The file said the shooting had happened during an attempted robbery. Jackson's neighbor was being attacked by 2 armed men. Jackson had grabbed his old service pistol and rushed to help. But in the chaos, someone fired. One of the robbers went down. When police arrived, all they saw was a man holding a smoking gun, a man with a record for bar fights and disorderly conduct. The system didn't care about his medals or the witnesses who said he was trying to help. They just wanted a conviction. The media painted him as a violent veteran, and the jury didn't take long to decide his fate. Ben sat there reading every page, every detail, until he finally closed the file and whispered, "He doesn't deserve this." Over the next few weeks, as the execution date crept closer, Jackson remained eerily calm. He didn't rant or beg. He spent his days writing, not to politicians, not to judges, but to an animal shelter in another state. Each letter carried the same quiet question: "Is Duke still alive?" The guards thought it was hopeless. Dogs didn't live that long, especially not service dogs. But Jackson never gave up. Then, one morning, an envelope arrived. The return address was from the Veterans Animal Rescue Shelter. Ben handed it to Jackson himself, curious but respectful. Jackson's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. He unfolded the letter and began to read. His eyes widened, his lips parted. Then a tear rolled down his cheek. Duke was alive. The letter said he was old now, grey around the muzzle, blind in one eye, and moving slower than before. But he still wagged his tail whenever someone said the name Jackson. When the warden heard the news, he visited Jackson's cell himself. "He's still out there," he said softly. "Your dog. He remembers you." Jackson closed his eyes, pressed a trembling hand to his heart and whispered, "Thank God, he remembers me." For the first time in years, he smiled. A small, broken smile. The kind that said maybe, just maybe, there was still a piece of goodness left in his world. It was early morning, the kind of morning where the air felt heavy with silence. The prison yard was empty, save for 2 guards, the warden, and one quiet man in cuffs. Jackson Reed stood there, his orange jumpsuit crisp, his wrists bound, but his posture calm, too calm for a man who knew this would be his final sunrise. The sky was still dim, painted in soft shades of grey and gold. In the distance, the sound of gravel crunching broke the silence. A black van slowly rolled through the gates, its engine low and steady. Every guard in sight froze, watching. No one spoke. Everyone knew what, or rather who, was inside. The van came to a stop, and the door slid open with a metallic creak. Out stepped a handler, and behind him an old German shepherd, Duke. The once strong military dog was now a shadow of his former self. His fur was patchy and greying. His legs trembled slightly as he stepped onto the cold ground. His eyes, cloudy with age, blinked uncertainly as he sniffed the air. For a moment, Duke didn't react. Years had gone by. Too many years. The sense of metal, concrete, and unfamiliar faces surrounded him. He looked lost until a soft, trembling voice broke through the morning stillness. "Hey, buddy, it's me." The sound froze Duke mid-step. His ears twitched. His head tilted. That voice, the one he'd heard through explosions, storms, and sleepless nights, the voice that once meant home. Jackson said it again, barely louder than a whisper. "It's me, Duke." And that was all it took. The old dog's nose began to twitch rapidly. His tail gave one hesitant wag. Then another, and another, faster, stronger, until it was thumping against the ground like a drumbeat of joy. He barked once, then twice. Then, with a sudden burst of strength no one thought he had left, Duke broke free from the handler's grip and stumbled forward. His legs wobbled, his breath came in short huffs, but nothing could stop him. He ran, half limping, half flying, straight toward the man in cuffs. The guards didn't move. The warden's jaw tightened as he blinked back tears. The sound of Duke's claws scraping the pavement echoed across the empty yard. And then finally they met. Duke leapt into Jackson's lap with a strength that came not from muscle, but from love. He buried his face into Jackson's chest, whining, licking, crying as if trying to tell him everything he'd missed, every lonely night, every empty morning waiting by a door that never opened. Jackson bent his head low, pressing his forehead against Duke's. His cuffs rattled as his hands tried to hold the dog close. "It's okay, boy," he whispered, voice breaking. "I'm here now." For a few precious minutes, time stood still. The prison walls, the guards, the rules, they all faded away. There was only a soldier and his dog reunited at last. Even the toughest guards turned away, pretending not to wipe their eyes. After the reunion, something extraordinary began. Something no one could have predicted. When Duke leapt into Jackson's arms, the guards had been too stunned to move. It was a scene straight out of a dream, raw, pure and heartbreakingly beautiful. One of the younger guards, moved by the moment, pulled out his phone and quietly recorded a short clip. It showed Duke stumbling across the yard, breaking free from his handler, and running into Jackson's embrace. The clip lasted less than 30 seconds, but it captured a lifetime of love. Later that night, the guard uploaded it online. He didn't think much of it. Maybe a few people would see it. Maybe some dog lovers would comment. But by dawn, the world had seen it. 10 million views. The internet exploded with emotion. People across the globe, from soldiers to teachers to strangers who'd never heard of Jackson Reed, were crying over a prisoner and his dog. Comments poured in like a flood. This man doesn't deserve death. He deserves mercy. If he can love like that, maybe there's still good in him. That dog's reaction says everything. Dogs know who their humans really are. Within hours, hashtags like Justice for Jackson and Duke and Jackson began trending. News channels picked up the story. Reporters called it the most heartbreaking reunion in prison history. People started digging deeper into Jackson's past, his service record and his conviction. What they found shocked them. Old neighbors came forward saying Jackson had always helped anyone in need. Fellow soldiers shared stories of how he'd carried wounded comrades under fire. Even the family of the man who had died that tragic night spoke out. The victim's sister appeared on live television, tears in her eyes. "My brother's death was an accident," she said. Jackson tried to save him. He doesn't deserve to die for it. Soon, lawyers, veterans groups, and human rights advocates began to rally. They demanded a full review of Jackson's case. Law students volunteered to go through his old court files. Petitions flooded the governor's office, hundreds, then thousands, then hundreds of thousands. In just 24 hours, Jackson Reed had gone from a forgotten inmate to a symbol of hope and of the justice system's failures. And then something no one expected happened. The governor, under immense public pressure, called an emergency meeting. After hours of reviewing the case and the new testimonies, a statement was released late that night. The scheduled execution of Jackson Reed has been temporarily halted pending a full case review. The news spread like wildfire. Across social media, people celebrated, cried, and posted photos of dogs with the caption, "Because love never dies." Inside the prison, Jackson sat quietly in his cell, Duke's head resting on his lap. The warden came to deliver the news himself. "It's not over yet," he said softly. "You've been given time." Jackson smiled faintly, tears glistening in his eyes as he looked down at Duke. "One old dog," he whispered, stroking the graying fur, "just reminded the world what humanity looks like." A month later, the impossible happened. Jackson Reed's death sentence was officially commuted to life in prison, with the possibility of parole. When the warden came to deliver the news, Jackson sat quietly on his bunk, Duke's head resting against his knee. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a soft chuckle, he whispered, "Guess Duke saved me again." No tears, no celebration, just a quiet smile, the kind that comes from a man who's seen too much and finally found peace. The warden, who had once been against the reunion, couldn't help but smile too. "Seems like that dog's got better lawyers than most men," he said gently. Not long after, the warden made a special request to the state to allow Duke to live within the prison grounds under a new veteran rehabilitation program. It was unprecedented, but after all the attention the story had received, the approval came through. Duke was given a small kennel just outside Jackson's block, though he rarely stayed in it. Every morning, as the sun broke through the razor-wire fences, the old German shepherd would make his slow, steady walk to Jackson's cell. He would curl up by the door, sigh deeply, and drift into sleep, as if he finally knew his mission was complete. Over time, something remarkable began to happen inside those grey walls. Inspired by his bond with Duke, Jackson started helping out in the prison's animal therapy program. At first, it was just cleaning kennels and refilling water bowls. But soon he began training rescue dogs, teaching them commands, trust, and discipline, just like he'd done years ago in the army. Word spread fast. Inmates who'd once spent their days in silence started volunteering to help. They said the dogs made them feel human again. Jackson became a mentor to them, calm, patient, always reminding them, if you can teach a dog to trust again, maybe you can learn to do the same. Months later, some of those dogs went on to serve as canine partners with police, therapy companions for children with disabilities, and even emotional support animals for firefighters and veterans. Each one carried a small tag that read, "Trained under the Jackson Reed program. Redemption lives here." Jackson's story spread far beyond the prison walls. He was no longer just an inmate. He became a symbol of second chances, a living reminder that redemption doesn't always wear a halo. Sometimes it wears a collar and wags its tail. Then one quiet morning, a year to the day after the reunion, Duke didn't get up. He passed away peacefully in his sleep, his head resting on Jackson's lap. The prison held a small ceremony in the yard. Even the toughest inmates, men who'd once mocked the idea of love, stood with tears in their eyes. Jackson spoke softly, his hand resting on Duke's worn collar. "He was my best friend," he said. "He saw the good in me, when no one else did." Then he looked up at the open sky, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll see you again, boy. You saved me twice, once in war and once in here." And in that moment, surrounded by silence and sunlight, it felt as if Duke's spirit was still there, loyal, watchful and waiting.